Motor racing tracks of the world today tend to follow the trend of prioritizing safety over life itself. Now laden with massive runoffs and flat corners that don't challenge the car or driver one iota, the dangers of motor racing now lay not with what corner you're taking, but whether you're sharing said racetrack with, say, Santino Ferrucci. These safety innovations aren't exceedingly popular with racing fans or even drivers nowadays, people saying that it's sterilizing the sport and that the spectacle has dwindled because of it. Well, all I'll say is, be careful what you wish for, because the reason those innovations have come about is because of the consequences of those supposed golden years that we all talk about. But despite this so-called sterilization of the world's racetracks, there are still some truly venomous tracks around the globe that continue to operate today. So, time to look at both of these worlds, take inventory, and check out the most dangerous racetracks that ever there was, ever. But before we get into it, we gotta lay down some ground rules here. Very basically, in order to be on this list, the track in question must start and finish at the same place. So essentially, rally raids, hill climbs, and rally special stages are not going to be in this thing. If you are hoping to see Pikes Peak, the Mille Milliers, or the Paris-Dakar in here, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but snake-headed aliens do run the oil business. And those tracks will not be in here. But all the same, the ones coming up invoked about as much terror as they did. To get but a taster of what's to come, first, some honorable, or I guess dishonorable, mentions. Right off the bat, you've got virtually every board track that was ever made in the early 1900s. Yeah, something about getting splinters while driving a car that was driving itself on the grooves carved into the track, while kids were poking their heads out of the gaps in the track itself, was a little bit asinine. There was Avis, or AVUS, in Germany. Boring on paper, terrifying in practice. That big banked corner acted as a sort of ramp and a timely reminder that humans are not natural flyers. If God had wanted man to fly, he would have given him wings, not a Maserati 250F. The same can be said of Fuji Speedway in Japan, or at least the first iteration of it. It had banking so rancid and dangerous that it scared even the most battle-hardened racers of the time. In 1992, Barcelona hosted the Olympic Games, and the epicenter of it all was on the mountain of Montjuic. Though a few years before this, it played host to one of the best street circuits in Formula One's history, as well as one of the most dangerous, with jumps, high-speed corners, and guardrails made from vibes. The Imola circuit in Italy never really had jumps, but it still invokes a certain airiness about it every time we go back there. Even with the modifications made since the tragic events of '94, it's still not without its dangers. If close walls give you claustrophobia, then the Mount Panorama circuit in Bathurst, Australia will be sure to have you shaking like a dog crapping peach seeds. It kinda seems we've dodged a lot of bullets with that track, because to go offline there is to rearrange your organs. There was the Italian circuit of Pescara, the longest circuit in Formula One's history. Now, if you're dangerous to a point where Enzo Ferrari refuses to allow his drivers to race on you, you're too freaking dangerous. And finally, the Circuit de la Sarthe, better known simply as Le Mans. While the track itself isn't particularly dangerous in 2024, it was a much different story in the years of old. And in 1955, it almost threw motor racing as a whole into extinction. And that is not an exaggeration there. But hold on. I know what you're thinking. These are merely honorable mentions? These tracks, all of which have some formidable reputations, there are ones worse than that? Well, yeah, Dora the Explorer, there are. So, sit back, boil some coffee, we're gonna dig right into it. Right after, in true YouTuber fashion, a word from my sponsor, Surfshark VPN. Almost all of us are familiar with what a VPN is. I mean, yeesh, if you're a loyal supporter of this channel, you should by this time. But just quickly for those who don't know, a VPN is a service that protects your information by encrypting all the data that you send through the internet, thereby protecting said data and keeping any minuses from getting at it. We don't want our stuff being compromised, and in an age where everyone is an introvert, privacy is our most valued asset, given the upper 1% has priced us out of everything else. Streaming seems to be our domain, our escapism nowadays. But even that's a headache sometimes, given they love to limit the content based on your location. Why they choose to do that, I don't really know. Well, maybe I do, but with Surfshark, you can change your location, at least virtually, and thus gain access to content otherwise not available in your region. I mean, it ain't quite teleportation, but it is about as close as we're gonna get right now. All of this sound good? Well, secure your privacy with Surfshark. Enter coupon code JoshRebel for an extra 4 months free with your subscription. That means for about a couple of bucks a month when all is said and done, you are fully protected. And with those 4 free months and a 30-day money-back guarantee, I've gotta ask, what the bloody hell are you waiting for? Okay, let's go. Set in the realms of Asia, there are few racetracks around the world that possess as much aura as this one. Lined with marquee black and yellow barriers, it's instantly recognizable to motor racing lovers around the globe. to most of those people, this track is known simply as Macau. Kinda lovely that they named a whole country after... Oh no. There are only 2 FIA-sanctioned Grand Prix that are not run within Formula 1, and this track hosts one of them, and arguably, it's one of the most prestigious of them all. By no means should the Macau Grand Prix even be running in the modern age. Yet, every year, the top brass of Formula 3 munchkins tackle the circuit and dance with mortality, as well as GT races and, rather alarmingly, motorcycle riders. The first sector is a flat-out blast across virtually half the region, where straying wide on either corner could lead to a massive ouchie. And once you get to Lisboa, the real nightmares begin. Sophia Flourish's aeronauticals a few years ago paid testament to the fact that danger is never too far away here. The mountain section almost feels like a faster-paced Monaco. Factor all that in, alongside a hairpin so tight that it is under perpetual yellow flag conditions, no really it is, make this a unique, farcical, and beloved circuit used year in and year out. It's still used to this day, as are a few other tracks on this list. The next one is in that most chaotically beautiful of all countries. Italia. I mean, where else? Few countries can lay claim to having as much influence in motor racing as what Italy has. Everything from manufacturers to drivers to, well, just about anything. In 1922, some people in Milan looked at what the British and the Americans did with Brooklands and Indianapolis respectively and decided, we can do that, thus building the world's third purpose-built racetrack that was much more complex than what those other two were. It has remained largely the same over the years, and we would come to know it simply as Monza. The original layout was a figure of 8 with a high-speed oval making up half of it. Right from the get-go, the Temple of Speed developed a reputation for 2 things, being a flat-out blast through parklands that exhilarated drivers and spectators, and also for being catastrophically dangerous. That banking was a particular menace, and for a while, the circuit was shut down so that major changes could be made. So what they did, in true Italian fashion, was demolish the oval course, getting rid of that dangerous banking, and replace it with even bigger banking. With the advent of chicanes, barriers, and other malarkey, Monza is a perfectly safe racetrack nowadays, though a lot of lessons had to be learned before it got there. Still though, at least they acted on these changes soon enough. Today, the Sachsenring in Germany is as safe can be. Nice long runoffs means you're unlikely to have a bad time if you do trip up here. But up until about 35 years ago, that was a very different story. The track was not the state-of-the-art facility, whose only danger is noise complaints from local Karens who moved in after the track was built, but instead, it was a road racing course that sighed its way through the surrounding villages. And from the mid-1920s up until 1990, this remained a constant attraction for thrill seekers across the land. But pretty much immediately, the dangers were apparent. The first few events alone were hugely chaotic and massively dangerous, with racing halted for a few years while they got their heads on straight. It did endure a lengthy campaign, but by 1990, the circuit just wasn't feasible for newer machinery, and thus the newer facility was built, bearing the same name. Owing to the nature of such things, this isn't going to be the last time that you're going to see a road racing track on this list. Matter of fact. If you were to hear of a racetrack called the Triangle, you would imagine it would be a fairly innocuous, boring thing. That isn't the case with what the Northern Irish have conjured up. The 9-mile circuit that screams across the roads of Coleraine, Portrush, and Portstewart gives a rush of exhilaration to the riders who spear along it in search of glory. That exhilaration quickly turns to fear and excrement when they fall off their motorbicycle. Crashing here is not a nice occurrence and can catch out even the best of TT riders. Chicanes have been added into the track, which, you know, that's cute, I guess, but the speed is still there. The danger is still there. Like I said, that is the nature of road courses. There is a degree of tolerance with them, though as was the case somewhere else in Europe, it can become too much. The Adriatic Sea meets the coastline of Croatia and the town of Opatija. I hope I said that right. It's a gorgeous place full of lovely villas and passive mafia types, but back in the early 1930s, it was decided that what was missing from this place was the fumes of vehicles to drench the landscape like an erroneous man-made blanket of fog. Whether by 2 wheels or 4, the venue was liked by competitors, partially due to its somewhat tricky nature, and mainly because of its close proximity to caviar and a rub down. Resort villages do be like that, I guess. But the safety standards of pre-war racing was similar to that of medicine, where broken bones were mended by use of chainsaws. So for a while, the officials thought nothing of the fact that less people walked away from the event than walked into it. By the time the 60s rolled around, however, people were becoming more safety conscious, and they could begin to see that the circuit was desperately unsafe. So much so that by 1968, the car racing fraternity said, no more. The bike riders soldiered on, but after a disastrous event in 1977, the FIM banned road racing from the World Championship, and racing as a whole would never return to these streets again. In the end, it was hideously dangerous, and the track itself was pretty unpopular with the competitors owing to the danger. But when it came to a racetrack that was reviled, none provoked quite as much vitriol as the next one. Bobby Unser was a legend of American open-wheel racing. He had won the Indianapolis 500 3 times and the Pikes Peak Hill Climb 10 times. He had done a lot of things in motor racing, but one thing that did stand out to him was one particular racetrack that invoked a venomous ire from within his soul, saying, "I raced all over the world, and that was the most dangerous, most treacherous, most murderous track there ever was. Nobody liked it, and the ones who said they did were lying." Try and picture in your head what kind of track he must be talking about. What could invoke such hatred from within his being to speak of a place like this? Whatever track you've got in your head right now, odds are it's probably not the one he was talking about. The track he was talking about was this one. It's an oval. A dead-ass oval. No straights or anything, just one long continuous left turn. It was called Langhorn Speedway, and you're probably thinking, what's so dangerous about this? Well, where do we start? Almost as soon as racing began back in 1926, the surface began breaking up, throwing rocks and dust into everyone's face. And I mean everyone, to the point where spectators were leaving the track because they couldn't see what the hell was going on. The extreme bumpy nature of the track would throw cars into walls, more often than not unaliving them, and make the drivers throw up. Hence why one of the corners was given the nickname Puke Hollow. Almost every year, this track was claiming a life, and it would claim big names. Championship winners, Indy 500 winners. No one was safe here. Eventually the circuit was reconfigured and paved before eventually fizzling out. The land was purchased by developers who paved paradise and put up a parking lot. And to that we say, good riddance. We can move forward. Although for us to move forward, we've got to go back to Northern Ireland. It was quipped by the manager of the legendary Joey Dunlop that there are 3 religions in Northern Ireland: motorcycle road racing and the other 2. No event speaks truer to that notion than the Ulster Grand Prix, the prestigious road racing event that tested the nerves of even the bravest of all motorbicyclists. Laid out on the Dundrod circuit, riders all across the globe made the summit yearly to prove how big their manhoods were. Back in the 50s, they were still racing cars around this thing. That all soon ended after rather predictable events that needn't really be uttered once again. Racing continued for years and years for TT racing and proved to be one of the staples of the sport. That was until 2021, when funding issues brought an end to proceedings. Whether this race runs again remains to be seen, but you kind of hope it does, because it really is that important to the sport. The hills of Stavelot echo to the sounds of engines that have screamed across its landscape for over 100 years. The roads over these hills played host to the Belgian Grand Prix time and again, and the Circuit de Spa-Francorchamps became a favourite amongst the racing fraternity and the fan base that followed it. Predictably though, with the fast-flowing corners and little in the way of chicanes and hairpins, danger was ever present. Couple that with recalcitrant weather that seemed to actively hunt drivers, this track gained a reputation for being beautiful but deadly. Eventually, too much of the latter. By the time the 70s rolled around, people had had enough, and a new purpose-built section of circuit was built in 1979. It was still fast, and it was still good, but it was still dangerous. Even in seemingly innocuous corners such as Blanchimont, it can be nasty if you're led astray. Eau Rouge and Radion still provide a challenge to this day, and the losses of Antoine Hubert and Delano Vanthoff prove that, despite the safety innovations that have made this track largely safe, it can still bite, and it could bite hard. But it's a staple of the calendar, a legendary track. Despite the dangers present, we just don't want to see it go away. And the same is true of the next one. The Triple Crown of Motorsport comprises of the Monaco Grand Prix, the 24 Hour of Le Mans, and the Indianapolis 500. To have one of the pillars of motorsport be contested around one big oval seems asinine. What's so tricky about turning left, then left, before, eventually, turning left again? Well, to those who have and still do race on this thing, this circuit has never been something to laugh at. In the early years, this thing was made entirely out of brick, hence why it was given the nickname the brickyard. But as the cars became faster, the dental bills were getting out of hand, so they repaved it to asphalt. Over the years, the massive high constant speeds gave no room for error. Couple that with cars that crumpled on a windy day, and the results were predictable. The safer barriers do absorb a lot of the impact nowadays, but Indy cars still hurtle around at 233 miles an hour average speed. If air gets under the car at that speed, you are going to fly. Where and when you land is up to fate. With the crowd in close proximity, the danger is present to more than just the drivers, especially in the days before all these safety innovations. This was a brutal place on the cars and the drivers. Looks can deceive, and this one certainly does. But if this track seems a little too simple to seem dangerous to you, then I guess I raise you this one. Most racetracks nowadays tend to average a distance of around about 3 to 4 miles. However, depending upon what year we're talking about, the Targa Florio was anywhere between 45 and 670 miles long. This leviathan of a racetrack used public roads, obviously, and acted as one big lap of the island of Sicily. Of course, operating a car in Sicily in the 40s would unnerve anybody. Checking under the car before you started it was essential if one of your mechanics was called Fabrizio. But the real danger lay with the track itself. I mean, learning a track like Spa back in the day was one thing, but how do you learn a track that was at least 5 times bigger than that was? Even Pescara, the longest Formula 1 track ever, was a piddling 15 miles compared to this. As the cars became faster, it was becoming more clear that such an event just couldn't continue. And with the Sicilians getting braver and braver, sticking closer and closer to the edges of the track, it was never going to last. Safety was a constant issue that was becoming greater as time went on. The last race was run in 1977, proved that obscenely large tracks that go beyond the 3 to 4 mile marker just aren't meant to survive in the modern age, though there are a couple of exceptions to this rule. This ribbon of tarmac that sides its way through the Eiffel mountain range in Germany provides a challenge for every single person that races upon it. No matter how well they know it, it'll always find a chance to bite. Yet, ask any racing fan or driver what is the greatest racetrack in the world and they'll probably point to this one. The enormity of the venue makes it seem impossible to learn properly, though once you do find the groove, the Nürburgring is driving nirvana. In particular, we're talking about the North Circuit, the Nordschleife. But despite the euphoria of pulling a sub 7-minute lap time around this behemoth, its reputation does precede it. In all its time in operation, and it hasn't even been a century yet, it has claimed hundreds of lives. Even in the 70s, it was labeled as too dangerous. And when we nearly lost Niki Lauda at the far end of the circuit in 1976, Formula 1 would never race on the Nordschleife again. Though it is still used for racing nowadays, primarily in the GT categories, and at the cost of €30, you yourself can drive a lap of this thing in your car. Then again, YouTube ain't short of clips of Mavericks taking flight around this track, thinking that they were Scheichel Mumacher. Though while it does bring out the worst in drivers, it can bring out the best in them. Tazio Nuvolari, Juan Manuel Fangio, and Sir Jackie Stewart produced the greatest drives in the history of motor racing here, all because they were willing to do what no one else dared to do, and especially back then, where the only barriers that this track had were trees and traveling Austrians. Even with barriers today, however, you will still find danger everywhere around here. Runoffs are minimal, and the speeds do remain high. But while this much is true, these features, as well as the ones of all of the tracks that have come before, frankly pale in comparison to the most dangerous track of all time. As the end of May draws nigh, the Indianapolis 500 comes to a close. For a lot of people, the greatest spectacle in motor racing has finished for the year. But on the other side of the globe, another event is set to take place, which, in the words of racer Cameron Donald, has been described as the final frontier. No, this motherfucker ain't in space. It's in the United Kingdom, on an island between Blackpool and Belfast. Every year, thousands make the pilgrimage to this place to witness the best and bravest win what has got to be the most prestigious motorcycle event in the world. It just had to be this, didn't it? It's the mountain course, the one that circles over half the island. An island that has become synonymous with the race and the track itself. The Isle of Man. There's a lot of circuit to learn here, with it being 38 miles long, and each section provides its own challenge. Whether it's the run down the hill to start the lap, the veranda, where a crash here will send you into another dimension, or Balagari, where a crash there will... Well, there are few guarantees in life, but that corner will guarantee you one thing if you screw up there. When you look at this course and the racing on it, whether through onboards or fan footage, it's not hard to see why this track is so dangerous. Cobblestone walls, lampposts, and trees everywhere, all while running along at the speed of light. It's a miracle that this event is even still running. Even though it's only used for about 1 week a year, it claims multiple riders every year. And due to the enormity of the challenge of learning this Goliath, as well as there being no room for error, this is undoubtedly the most dangerous racetrack in the world. Unless, of course, some smartass in the comments wants to bring up Rainbow Road. I mean, that technically does start and finish in the same place. It's not real, but I didn't technically say that a track had to be real to be on here. Right? Well, I'm sure otherwise that y'all have got some other ideas for dangerous tracks, whether it's the Jeddah Corniche Circuit in Saudi Arabia, the Daytona International Speedway in the United States, Nemuna Zaides in Lithuania, Bremgarten in Switzerland, Dover Raceway in Jamaica, El Jabali in El Salvador, or Sigues Terramar in Spain. Either way, you'll notice that there weren't very many newer tracks on the list, and obviously, that's all because of the lessons learned from tragedies of the past. Call it sterilization? Pfft, that's easy for us to say when we're not the ones racing.